Oh, really? The critical path.
So tonight is the night that Wendy said she could not be there.
She's not, she's planning on, but she said we got kicked off. Yes, because I ended the meeting, I needed to end the meeting.
I was here last.
So we are ready. Okay,
Last
I
month.
told her it's back on, so, but I had sent her to thing.
I never got it.
Yeah, she's in the planning commission, but I was texting her, but she wasn't able to make it. Is she back?
Yeah, yeah. I have in my calendar, I have all his back. I so when they change the time, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, because I put them in like the whole kind of time, and then I just changed it.
I would recommend it to you to get back.
I don't know.
Oh, you're gonna look her up. Okay, yeah.
You do?
A village board meeting and a public hearing for the budget. Feel free to be around if you want. But you don't live here, so you probably, yeah.
If you put your pen away, I don't think that would work.
Yeah, you just shared it, great.
Thanks.
Wendy, can you hear me? Wendy, I put you on the TV screen. Is that okay? Do you want to attend the meeting that way?
That's just fine. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Wonderful.
Okay, good. So you'll be on the TV, just so you know. Sorry that the other meeting ran over. We'll get started as soon as we can here.
No problem.
Why do you want to watch this one?
I just want to see what it's about. I mean, if it's interesting or not.
Steve Payla, Steve here. Yeah, either he left his book. Left his book. Yeah, take his book. Saves money that way.
I think this is the actual village meeting here, the actual something. The other one was a planning commission.
And so he has these, you know, he's had all these people that were, I'm glad you came back. I was gonna take that nice briefcase there.
You guys can prepare.
That's kind of going down.
Thank you.
Well, it's being this one then too.
I would think so.
Yeah, you're like.
Right. Yeah.
You got a lot of choices, man. It's like the used car lot.
I had no idea Mike had anything to do with this board.
We got Oh, they're on the front window. Sorry about that. I couldn't catch it. My friend is still there.
That was a discussion I had.
We got.
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the Village Board of Lannon Special Village Board meeting public hearing to order on Thursday, November 21st at 7:15 p.m. If you haven't silenced your phones, please do so, and we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Calatola Roby.
Here.
Grenier,
Here.
Lake.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Newman. Here. Summers.
Here.
And Yates is present. Statement of public notice. Thank you. Item 5, we have a public hearing on the proposed 2025 budget. So I would like to open that public hearing. Wendy, do you want to walk us through where we're at, and then we can open it up for input from the public?
Of course. So hopefully everybody has, I believe you've been provided the budget document. I will use the highlights page, which is the page that is titled Village of Lannon 2025 budget. It's got a 2024 column and a 2025 column. I will go through at a very high level the variances between 24 and 25, and then conclude with the actual adjustment to the tax levy. So the information as part of putting together the budget, we met, I believe, 2 times with budget workshops, and put together the budget document that is before you tonight. This is without the referendum passing, so there are some differences than what we had talked about from a referendum standpoint. So when we look at the highlights that you have in front of you, we'll look at the first part, the total government, general government category. 2024 had $279,000 of budgeted expenses. 2025 budget has a proposed budget figure of $347,000. So a decrease of roughly $30,000 over the previous year. The main area that you can see that fluctuation occurs in is within the municipal building category, and that is due to some funds that were budgeted in 24 related to the parking lot. So those figures are not rebudgeted in the current year. The public safety category, you'll note $608,000 in 24 compared to a $719,000 budget figure for 2025. The main area for the increases within the fire department. These are figures that are provided to the village by the Village of Menominee Falls. So as you can see, the figure for 24 was $359,000. For 2025, it's $417,000. So a relatively significant increase there. Also within the police department, you'll note roughly a $24,000 increase that is related to some payroll increases and the related benefits from Social Security, Medicare, and WRS. On the inspection side, you'll note $54,000 of expenses for 25 compared to $25,000 in 24. The inspection side is really driven off of the revenue. So the revenue is budgeted based on anticipated permits from a building, plumbing, electrical, that type of activity. And then the expense side is 20% of that. 80% of that figure. So this is really driven off of revenue. And again, based on what is anticipated on the revenue side. When we move into the public works category, you'll note $148,000 was budgeted in 24, $140,000 in 25. And you'll note that the fluctuation is within the road maintenance and repair category and snow and ice control. In 2024, there was more budgeted for patching and maintenance, and that was not included in the 25 budget. and then snow and ice control. That is really something that is typically unknown, obviously, at the time of putting together the budget, but based on some historical costs and actual figures, that was increased to 65,000 over the 35,000. When we move into the health and sanitation category, relatively consistent with the previous year. The rubbish removal and recycling costs, there's an offsetting revenue category for that. So that is essentially a wash. Whatever the expense is, the offsetting revenue is generated from the citizens of the village. And then the culture, recreation, and education category, up a little bit, roughly $3,000 over the previous year in the park and rec category. And that is, again, based on some wage adjustments for the given year. When you look at the total budgeted general fund expenditures, 1.39 million for 25, up from 1.324 million in 2024. The difference is based on what I explained previously. The revenues that are budgeted for 2025 are $682,000. Again, those are all revenues that are not tax related. So these are fines and forfeitures, investment income, that type of activity. And you can see those in more detail in the back portions of the packet that you've been provided. In order to balance the budget, the levy is set. So the amount that the village can levy from a general fund perspective based on growth is $341. That compares to $616,000. So again, that is adjusted annually based on growth within a municipality. But again, in order to balance the budget, there is some fund balance that's being applied, roughly $13,485 that is used to balance the budget. That will come out of really the savings that the village has had in previous years. The bottom portion of the highlight is the debt service. So the village does have debt that is not utility related that they need to pay for on an annual basis. The total principal and interest related to debt in the village, again, not utility related, is $595,000 for 25. A portion of that is offset by a TIF increment that is being generated on an annual basis. So the net amount that needs to be levied for debt in the village is $41,000. So overall, the total tax proposed levy is $741,000 compared to $668,000 in the previous year. That tax rate works out to be $3.03 per $1,000 of assessed value, and that compares to roughly a $2.91 tax rate per 1,000 of assessed value in 2024. So overall, roughly a 4.25% increase in the amount that will ultimately go on to tax bills, assuming that this budget is approved as it stands as I presented it. One thing to keep in mind, budgets are expenditure driven. We look at expenditures first, and then we offset that with the revenues that are able to be generated within the municipality, and then ultimately offset by the tax levy that is allowed to be levied on an annual basis. At this point, any questions regarding what we've presented thus far?
Yes. Can you walk me through, so there's two areas where we have fund balance indicated under the general fund and the debt service fund. Now, the debt service fund seems to align just fine. I think I have a pretty good understanding why that's the case. But there's a pretty significant drop between the end of year 2024 fund balance and proposed beginning of year 2025 fund balance. Can you just walk us through that a little bit?
Are you on the publish page, the page that says general and debt service fund, final 2025 budget at the top? I think we're looking at two different documents. Okay.
So The 2024 fund balance end of year is listed as 527,919.
Yep.
The 2025 beginning of year is listed at 290,601.
So the 2025 beginning fund balance is that which existed at the end of 2023. So at this point, we don't know what's going to happen in 2024. That is not a year that's been audited, but we do know where 23 ended. So that 290,000 is the figure that represents the fund balance in the general fund at the end of 23. And obviously, when we put together the 24 budget, we did not know what that was going to be at that point in time. So that's what the difference is. So that 290,000 is actual as of today, not taking into account what happened for 24.
So that's always a year behind.
Yes, because we don't know that at the time we're putting together the previous year budget. Correct.
Okay, I would ask, do any of the trustees have any comments or questions? Everything's lining up the way you recall them from the workshops.
My only concern is, and I brought this up at the workshops too, is the increase to, in wages to both, to the clerk and stuff. And I'm not saying they don't deserve a pay raise, but, that huge of a jump to me, is a little bit much when we're in the situation that we're in. And when you look at Social Security, it's only 2.5%. That's gonna be an increase next year. Now, I'm not saying that that should be the same thing, but I think a 9% jump is a little too much.
I don't recall approving a 9%
Well, we just.
for the
did-
police.
We did just, no, I'm talking about the clerk.
Clerk.
We just did random numbers.
So we did dollar,
Yes.
well, we did a percentage for
5%.
Brenda, did 5% for Brenda, and then
Nicole's was, I mean, just kind of catch her up some. but-
$2 is what I, if I recall correct, from 20 to 22, was that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Still talking about 7% inflation here recently. It's kind of a catch-up rate. To keep staff.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they don't deserve it.
Right,
But we are in a situation as a village board that we need to look at ways to save. To save, and I'm not, that's one of the places that struck me right away. And I remember in the budget meeting, I brought up that next year we should do it through performance reviews. On them, on all three, the two maintenance guys and the two ladies, and I feel that the ladies in the office should be done by Patrick, because he has more dealings with them. The maintenance guys should be done by Public Works and by Parks, because they have more dealings with them. But to just throw random numbers out, I'm not so sure.
so I would, my recollection was they were not random in nature at all. It was a 5% increase for Brenda, taking into account the cost of living increase. And the number for Nicole was a requested number from Brenda to get her more in line with other people performing the same duties. I agree, they do seem like large jumps, but I will also say that as someone who employs a number of people, it is much more expensive to lose good people because you're not providing a competitive wage than it is to deal with finding a way to pay them, if that makes sense. So there can be a huge impact to losing a good employee.
We did increase Nicole's hours as well, if you wanted to reduce them back to the 25 to 28. I mean, that would save money as well.
Right,
That you need her.
right,
Yeah.
so,
And I'm not disputing any of that.
But.
right,
I guess what
we
I'm
can
trying
change
to
our
do
numbers.
is, as you were saying, Patrick, yes, it is harder to find a good person and train them and bring them all, it costs more money. But every one of us have worked a job that we would all likes to be paid what the other person in another company gets paid. You know, as a competitive kind of thing, and it just doesn't work that way.
Not, but I understand where you're coming from, but not in this time. This time and era, these people will come and go just for money. And that's the thing, the higher up, the next person will give them $5,000 more, they're on their way.
I mean, Butler was just,
You
was
know.
hiring a deputy for $25 an hour. That's why I just bumped her up a little bit.
So-
I'm not saying
And
to
that's
change
not
it,
saying
I'm
that.
just throwing out.
Okay.
and
Well,
I'm just offering the counter, argument, you know, I think it's, you know, I've had to deal with it more times than I care to think about, and it's difficult, and to Anna's point, we're in a much different workforce environment today than we've ever been in.
We are.
Since COVID and
Mhm.
people remote and all of that, it is a completely different landscape. You know, it's the same reason that we're, you know, moving to increasing the wages for the police officers. You know, we're trying to attract and keep good talent. Or as good a talent as we're able to get
Afford.
or afford, yeah,
I don't want
So-
Lannon to be a swinging door.
Yeah, and that's what will happen.
right,
If
right.
we don't keep up with everybody else.
Well, to Terry's point, in
Yeah,
defense
you
of
know.
Terry, what she's
Yeah.
trying to do is do what was, the call has come from the public to the board to tighten our belts, don't
Yep.
tax more and
Yeah.
tighten our belts.
Yep.
So in your defense, Terry, I absolutely agree with you. But I tell you what, I will give up my stipend for being on this board before I take it away from the girls that actually work full-time jobs.
I don't wanna
So-
take it away from the girls, I
Yeah.
just wanna.
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, but what you're saying is that we have been given a mandate
Mhm.
to not borrow money and do it with what we've got.
Exactly.
But it's the people, I think, is not the place that we should concentrate on.
No, I would take it out of, you know, hey, if we can't patch the roads, then we can't patch the roads. We don't put any money in that budget. Because
That's what's happening.
this village has to be able to operate effectively and efficiently. And that kind of turnover and turmoil that is a killer. That's a killer.
I
So I appreciate the concern, and I think you're right. I think going forward, we should implement a process where those types of increases are considered more carefully and weighed more carefully with, you know, tangible evidence that not only is good for us, it's good for them as well. I think a lot of employees like feedback and, you know, good and bad. So,
I do.
I agree with you, but I know just what's happening because of my daughter in the workforce.
Right, performance
Yeah.
reviews,
Yeah.
I would, and I think we will implement that next year, that far in advance of when Wendy gets involved, we will have our performance reviews done prior to
Yep.
sitting down and
Yes.
working out the budget.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah, let's keep that on our agenda for August next year,
absolutely, well, or July,
or July.
maybe even June.
Yep.
You know, we got, in my opinion, too late of a start on the process this year. I know we had an election and stuff, but we've got to do better.
One other thing to keep in mind though is a few years back, we were sadly lagging in wages.
Very much so.
So these increases were to bump the village employees up to get them more competitive.
We're playing catch up.
So that's kind of, you know, I'd like to get a 9% in my social security, but it ain't happening. But I'm also not in the general workforce, and we have to keep in mind, Brenda, what do you get for benefits?
WRS.
And that's it. No,
Okay,
no
so
insurance.
there is a huge get their just in insurance, so.
Yeah.
You have to keep that in mind as part of their total package.
Insurance is not cheap.
I imagine we may have some comments from the public. If you do want to say something, please just make sure you stand up, state your name and address, so Brenda can get that on the record, please, so we can. But I would open it up to the floor if folks have comments that they want to make.
I'll put it out there.
Okay.
Jim Willard, 9953 Overstone. So this is probably very unpopular. But you know, I have a question as to why do you think we need both full-time officers on the same shift? You know, couldn't there be, you know, less of an overlap to spread out the public safety part?
So I think that's a fair question. So I think you folks overlap 2 hours, I believe, correct? So they aren't on the same shift necessarily, but I think some overlap and some transition is a good thing. I don't know if 2 hours is the right amount of time for that. I don't know. I mean, could you cut it to an hour? Maybe?
I thought they were on the same shift, that's why.
No,
Okay,
no. Chief is in the morning, and then Amanda comes in the afternoon. They overlap for 2 hours during the day. Go into the evening, and then we have another part-time officer that'll come in and pick up shifts into the evening after the lieutenant leaves. Yes, ma'am.
Janet Perry, 20071 Overstone Drive, Lannon, obviously. How many part-time officers do we have?
10,
Why so many?
because most of them work very few shifts. So in order to fill the shifts that the chief has available, we need to have a large pool to draw from. Even at 10, I think there are still shifts that are going unfilled. Again, part of that is probably due in part to the fact that our wages are so low. So for the officers that have opportunities in other communities, they make a business decision and they go where they're gonna get paid more. And I can't fault them for that. That's a challenge that the chief has to deal with. And all he can do is ask for higher wages to try to be more competitive, and then we can try to provide it to them. Unfortunately, you know, we did build in some in this budget, some of the increases, but that's part of the reason that we were asking for the referendum or putting it out there to the public to vote on. Because in time, as these wages continue to go up, it's quite possible it's just gonna get more bleak.
And over the years, we have lost tremendous amount of employees in the police going other places, just all the time.
We're a very transitional, I would say, department. Would you say that's fair, chief? So what we tend to get is we tend to attract a lot of officers that are new, that need experience. Okay, and they're willing to work for less because they're typically younger, I believe.
Yeah.
Or officers that are coming out of maybe Milwaukee or other departments that have been there for a very long tenure. Don't want to work full-time anymore, maybe don't want to work in as rough a neighborhood or whatever. They come out to sleepy old Lannon and tool around in a squad for, 3-4 hours a night. It's and this kind of ride it out until they're ready to retire. So I think, we do occasionally, and I think we have currently a couple of very good, competent part-time officers, but the barrel that the chief has to draw from to fill those shifts is pretty shallow.
And in the past, when we get the younger guys, people, as soon as they do get some experience and they get an offer somewhere else and they move on.
Then they're gone.
And we've been going through this for the 25 years I've been involved in it.
So I think Nate was telling me he works also in, is it Waterford? I think in Waterford there, he's getting, I think he said it was like $42 an hour. And we just bumped ours up in this budget to 28 from 25.
Same as the school bus drivers get.
So, you know, if you're him, where are you gonna work? You know,
Where is it closer to home for him?
yeah,
You know, because travel might have something to do with it.
sure,
too.
absolutely.
Money talks.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Sure, I have some questions.
Yep.
Dan Batiste, 216 North Weather Edge Circle. I mean, you guys run a pretty lean budget. I mean, you guys are, you know, for the most part, there's a few things that I think we've brought to you guys during the workshops, where I think we were getting a little aggressive and egregious, and we've scaled that down, and so I appreciate you guys taking the steps during those workshops to reduce that. Some things I think that we could explore a little bit more, and I know, Patrick, you mentioned a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, that you were meeting with Waukesha County for the municipal court.
Lake Country.
Lake Country.
Yep.
Is that something further that we can explore about whether or not we have municipal court here in Lannon? Is that
So-
necessary?
So, the chief and I did go out and attend, one of their meetings, out in Economowoc. That is an option in the future. There are some statutory things that need to be explored regarding our current judge. You can't just, you know, tell a judge, hey, sorry, we don't need you anymore. So, that would have to be explored. The one nice thing, we thought that, it wasn't going to be at any cost to us. But we do still have to provide our own prosecutor. So, because I thought that was a good suggestion, we did investigate it. And the chief and I have had some discussions about, you know, hey, how many citations do we think we have to write on average to justify having our own court? So I don't have definitive answers for you, other than I know we can't just make the change now. But I will promise that we'll continue to investigate that option. We'll continue to monitor, the citations, and we can also look at things that maybe using, a different prosecutor that maybe doesn't cost as much. So that is an area I think where there may be opportunities, but there's not an easy fix.
Patrick, when we looked at it about 10 or 12 years ago, I thought we lost some revenue though, that we had to give up more revenue to Lake County than what we would get on ourselves.
No, Lake Country, we would still get, Chief, can you break that down for me? Do you recall specifically how that works? We still get like it's still basically a third of the fines and forfeitures. Certain portions go to state and the county.
We would still have a clerk. We would all go by him.
Well, and you know, again, that's part of the equation as well, right? So you've got your legal, you've got a clerk cost. And I think that was Mr. Batiste's point is, you know, if we're, you know, why are we spending this much money on a court? Are we, you know, is it justified? Are we losing money by doing it, or would it be more efficient or cost effective to outsource it? I think what I'm trying to say is we will continue to investigate and evaluate that. Unfortunately, right now, our hands are tied on whether or not we do that. We can't just unilaterally make that decision without certain legal steps being taken, because you can't just remove a judge.
No.
And I will say that, as chair of Parks, and Recreation, I did have a meeting with, the Lannon Stonemen, which are one of the, organizations that use the park. You'll notice that the park budget is at right around $90,000. and that is, it is a large number and it is not offset by a lot of revenue from them. So I talked to them about raising, their fees and the feasibility of that, and or doing some cooperative advertising, using some of the assets in the park to add advertising to it that their clubs could sell to sponsors, and then some of that sponsorship money would come back to us. I will point out that he brought me receipts in the amount of about $30,000 of infrastructure that they have added to the park in the last year. So they look at it as they're offsetting our costs by improving the grounds. You know, they've planted trees, they've added physical structures and things. So I'm working on that to try to offset that budget a little bit so that we can still have a nice park for all of us to share and that we're not all carrying the burden on it. But there are always two sides to every argument, and I found that out in that meeting. It's kind of hard to beat somebody up when they bring you $30,000 worth of receipts that is going into your park, so.
Right.
But just an update on that, Mr. Batiste.
Did you have something else too, other than the municipal court?
Well, I mean, I could keep asking questions all night, but, how much of our, public works, street patching, things of that nature can be funded from our TIDs? I mean, our TIDs allow us to do street improvements, streetscapes. They also allow us to do within a half-mile radius beyond the extent of the TID, which pretty much covers the entire village of Lannon, between the two TIDs. So, I mean, ultimately, if there's funds in the TIDs, that is set up that those can be utilized to perform upgrades for utility services, street and road improvements. I mean, do we even need to have a budget for street patching and road work? I mean, can't all of that be sourced through the TIDs?
So that may be an option. Generally, a lot of what you've seen the last couple of years in that budget item has been more for work to be done to this parking lot here that needs some work and the parking lot at the park. Now, the funny thing about TIDs is you can't use those funds on municipal properties. For whatever reason, you can't use like TID funds to build a new village hall or improve the village hall or. So that's the one funny thing about TIDs. The road reconstruction, I know, like Good Hope Road, that was an identified project in there. So as long as it's an identified project, you can allocate funds to that. I don't know that just patching and repairs to various streets and roads is allowable.
That's annual maintenance.
Right. So I would have to check with Ellers on that one.
But again, here, back when I first moved to this village, previous to Jerry's time, there were so many things that were pushed off. And since I've been involved in the village board, and I think Patrick and Jerry can say the same, there's been a lot of catch up in pretty much the entire budget. And it's first time you go through one of these, it's mind boggling. Trying to understand what they did 15, 20 years ago, why they pushed off a lot of stuff. So I think anybody that's on the board for a length of time has to look at this. I think Terry and Patrick, you would agree on that. You guys got more time in than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's historically, I know when I came on the board, it was pretty bleak. I was pretty shocked, actually. The first budget meeting I went to. But,
And we didn't have TIPS money in those days either.
right,
All we had is budget.
right. So things are getting a little bit better. I mean, we have been able to increase our levy through net new construction, so we get that benefit. So it is getting better, but obviously, as you've seen, there's there's some pains along with trying to figure out how to allocate that. But I've made a note of that. I'll ask about that and see what Eller says about those types of things. But historically, our budget for that was woefully low. But when we did the water project, we were able to get all of those roads were included in that project. They were all resurfaced. We do have Main Street as a county road. Good Hope from Maine to the east is a county road, so those are their responsibilities. So a lot of the new developments are private roads. So, you know, we do have a smaller amount that we have to try to monitor and maintain now, and that's really the last big chunk of it is this Good Hope Road section, which, you know, I think you're all aware at this point that doing the water main project, once we nail down the potential interconnection with Sussex and get that project in the ground, in a couple of years, that whole stretch of Good Hope's gonna get completely rebuilt. And that will be a combination of TID funds and about $5 million in WISDOT grant money that we were able to obtain.
But projects like the Bonnie Road, that would not be within a half mile of the TID, correct? That would be.
No, Bonnie Lane
Bonnie
would be,
But there's a major problem with that is that it's gotta be totally rebuilt. It's built on topsoil and it's amazing it's lasted as long as it has. And when we do that, we've gotta put water in too,
Yeah, right.
so.
What is the road, Good Hope east of the quarry? There's that one private road there that we were talking. We
Yellow.
needed to have,
Narrow
the
lane,
narrow lane.
that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, that would be one that's not close to the.
But that's a private road.
private road, we wouldn't do anything with that in.
What else you got? Oh, go ahead.
I have one more question. So rubbish removal and recycling.
Yep.
In our subdivision, we pay for our own, so why are we paying for a part of?
You're not.
We are not, okay,
You are not.
It's
And
on
that
the
is,
income and the expense.
okay,
and that is basically a pass through.
okay.
We collect the revenue, pass it on through
Okay.
that
Okay, thank
company,
you.
so it shows as a revenue on there. But it's also a corresponding
Okay,
expense,
I didn't see that, thank you.
similar to the inspection, building permits and inspection services.
And Wendy is nodding.
We get to keep 20% of the inspection revenue. That's the only difference there. What else do we got? Anybody else?
What about renegotiating with the fire department?
Yeah.
Well, that's, we tried.
That's something that's on my radar as well.
And we talked, Patrick, about that, about where do those numbers actually come from? And how did Menominee Falls grow the same as we
Yep.
grew? And if we don't have the right to question the state about that, our numbers didn't grow like theirs did, so it's not truly a reflection on what it should be.
Right, so that is something that, again, I will continue to work on and see if I can't come to some sort of resolution there. It's not gonna be before we need an approved budget,
Right.
but it is something that I can continue to work on and investigate and just open some discussions with Menominee Falls. Again, I don't know how far I'll get. We do have a contract.
What about the state of Wisconsin? Instead of going through them, what about them? Where do they get those numbers from? How did Menominee Falls not grow more than we grew?
I don't know, that's
Gotta be researched.
that's the
that's what
state
I asked
who,
about last
the
time, too.
Board of, or what is it, Board of Administration, I think, comes out with those numbers, Brenda, or Department of Administration.
And we don't know what they reported.
I don't know how they get any of those numbers, because to my knowledge, and I think I asked you this, Brenda, I mean, they don't come and ask you, do they?
They ask building inspectors.
Right.
So he gives the numbers for new homes built every year, things like that.
Okay,
But it's an estimate, you know,
right, it's permit driven, they don't know if there's
they have no.
2 people living there or 8.
And our deal is
Right.
based on population. So we've got to
Right,
do
but
an
they said our
investigation.
population grew as much as Menominee Falls did, and that's
No.
very hard to
Again,
believe.
maybe properties, but we don't know.
No, population,
Yeah, we don't know.
Menominee Falls is so much bigger than we are.
right, so their
Yeah,
population should
I
be
find
larger.
it hard to believe
was
that they only grew the same number that we did, but they used the established number for the calculation from the source that was established and
And then maybe they, got their estimated numbers and they dealt with the state on that, because you can dispute it or whatever, but I don't know, what they do.
so continued work on the fire contract. Any other questions, comments about the budget before us that we're trying to get approved tonight? Anybody from the board?
Not much more we can take away.
Make a motion that we close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public hearing. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 7. Discussion and possible action on approval of the proposed budget, 2025 budget.
I'll make a motion that we approve the proposed 2025 budget as presented.
And I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Wendy, anything you want to add?
Not at this time,
Wendy, thank you for your assistance as always.
of course.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming and
Wendy?
participating.
Oh, she's gone.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, she was quick.
He was not
I
taking
second
any
what
chance.
Patrick just said.